Christopher Calvano, who served in the U.S. Marines July 13, 1944 through March 29, 1946. This interview is taking place in Guilderland, New York on September 30th, 2003 at 10:30 a.m. This interview is being conducted by Kenneth and June Hunter. What is your full name, and when and where were you born?
My full name is Christopher N. Calvano, spelled with a C-A-L-V, Victor, A-N-O, born in Amsterdam, New York, July the 4th, 1918.
What did you do before you entered the service?
I was an order clerk at the General Electric Company as the last employment that I had before joining the military on a voluntary basis.
And why did you enlist in the service?
My feeling was, since my early days of life, of always wanting to become a Marine.
And now you were married when you enlisted, weren't you?
I was married, and Frances was pregnant with our second child at the time. And I left the office at noon, went up to the draft board, and volunteered to go into the Marines. I had to fight my way into being accepted because after 3 deferments with the General Electric on defense work, and my draft number was not up at the time, they told me to go on back home. But I insisted and finally signed up to go and be inducted in Albany. Of course, upon arrival home from the draft office, I related the news to my wife, but I don't recall the expressions on her face at the time, but I can assure you that it probably was not the best.
Mm-hmm.
What was the climate like during how were the people feeling at that time when you were down to the draft board?
When I went down to the draft board to be inducted, they were going to put me into the Army. And I argued about it, saying that I didn't come here to join the Army. I was not drafted, and my desire was to become a U.S. Marine. And they told me that the quota was filled at the United States Marine, and they had no room for me. Whereas I specified that because of the many Marines being killed overseas, I felt that they had room for me to join. As a result, the recruiting Marine officer said he would return and let me know his findings. Upon his return, he says, "You have been accepted to go into the Marines, but you will regret it the day you ask for it."
And overall, have you ever regretted it?
Yes, I regretted it only to the point that my boot days were the toughest days of my military life, with bunions and suffering, but enjoying the mosquitoes and the trials and tribulations of a Marine boot camp.
How did you find out that you were accepted into the Marines, and where did they send you for training?
I was accepted down in Albany, the old railroad station on North Pearl, and they sent me down to Paris Island, where they met me at the station called Yamasee, and from there they boarded us on a bus to Paris Island.
And what was the basic training like for you? You were a older person, weren't you, than a lot of the others?
The basic training of the Marine Corps was very, very tough. We had 8 weeks of basic training. We endured furrows several inches deep in marching, mosquitoes, nicks, to our bedding near latrines.
How was the food like? What kind of uniforms did they issue you? What was your pay, if you can remember at that time?
Yeah, the Marine uniform was dungarees, and we had 2 sets. Each day we had to clean them, wash them, and put them out to dry, and put a new set on for the next day. The food was good. We had no complaint about food. We got up early in the morning, went to bed late at night, and you better sleep. Otherwise you stood up in the middle of the night with a bare chest and have mosquitoes biting you because some foolish Marine had this big mouth open all night long and wouldn't sleep and allow the drill sergeants to sleep. And they gave us the business. All right, fall out. And there we stood. And if you had to stand at attention at heat, which was awful hot during July through September, if you fell flat on your face in the sand.
Now, going back just before you got called into the service, there are some things that people don't remember, especially from the youngsters today. We were subject to things like rationing. Can you remember what it was like when we had rationing before you went in on your call?
The rationing I remember was the gasoline and the rubbers, tires, because I had to travel from Amsterdam to Schenectady General Electric. And at that time they used to issue us coupons for so many gallons of gasoline. And you didn't use them foolishly. You used them religiously for what they were intended to be.
What about rationing for food?
In the civilian life, it was a little tougher. You couldn't get butter, but we made good go of the food that we raised in the garden, whatever we could, like Victory Gardens, and picking up dandelions in the fields and raising beans and the old Italian style, but it really stuck to us, and we made our own bread. And it was a way of life those days, unknown to many of the younger boys and girls today in this life.
Now, returning back to the days of recruiting, when you first went in, what did they give you haircuts to the regulation style and inoculations, a physical?
As we arrived at Paris Island, Diamond Lou was an old-time Marine that could put a mortar shell, I forget how many feet, into a barrel. He was the barber, and he charged us 50 cents. He had an electric clipper, and he stood us on a box out in the sunlight, up one side, up the other side, up and across. Okay, you're done. And he had about less than an inch left on top of your head. And the reason for that was you had to leave enough hair so you didn't get sunstroke.
What about the medical treatment, the examination, inoculations? Did they prepare you for this, or was it a surprise?
Yes, they did, but at times when you complained about blisters and you wanted them lanced, they would call you, just to tease you, sick bay Marine, but they would send you.
How long was your basic training?
8 weeks.
And what were some of the things you experienced in basic training? Did you have rifle and pistol experience, learning how to go through obstacle courses, bayonet drill?
I was perhaps more fortunate than many of the Marines in boot camp, particularly because of the fact I was a musician, and they asked me to go and get auditioned for a band, the United States Marine Band. As a result of that, I missed the chemical warfare indoctrination or training, and the infiltration course, because each time I was called to go for rehearsals, whereas we also broadcast every Thursday at 4 o'clock from CBS for an hour band concert throughout the country from Paris Island.
Now, how did you get your training? Did you just pick this up, or did you have schooling for to be a musician?
I started playing the violin when I was 11 years old, and I went through my musical life the hard way. I used to shine shoes in my father's shoe shop for 10 cents. I eventually was able to buy a music stand, buy my own strings. I used to carry my violin to school, walk 2.5 miles to go and 2.5 miles to come back with a paper brown bag with my lunch. No bus token. My musical experience involved music theory, harmony, composition, choir work, orchestration, band. Ended up as a honor student of music honors upon graduation.
And where did you graduate from?
I graduated from the Amsterdam High School, the Wilbur H. Lynch.
Oh, yes.
Now, getting back to the Marines, how did they appreciate the musical concerts?
Yes, it was a joy playing in the band. We used to get up 6 o'clock in the morning and we'd have rehearsals. And 12 o'clock noon, while I was in headquarters battalion after boot camp, I was free till the next morning. But then I used to go to what we call the bowling alley and set up bowling pins and made money that way and put it in the bank. So eventually I got home on 2 emergency furloughs through the Red Cross to come home once because my brother died and there was nobody home outside of me as a man. And the second time my wife had a hard time with Christine when she was born, our second daughter.
So then where did you go after basic training?
After the basic training, I stayed right on Paris Island in headquarters battalion with the general. And then from there, after 2 furloughs, emergency furloughs, I was told I had to go to New River or Camp Lejeune for another week. There we took issued new rifles, had to clean the cosmoline off with cold water. And you can imagine what you had to do to get it off. And from then on, it was kind of cold. We used to have snow banked up against our pup tents. Then after 1 week, we left and we went through Georgia, through the southern part of the states, all the way to Camp Pendleton. And there we stayed for another week until we joined a ship, USS Annie Arundel, for overseas deployment.
Where were you deployed to then, and what Marine units were you assigned to?
I was assigned to the 3rd Marine Division, and when I got aboard ship, I was assigned into the galley. The ocean being as smooth as glass, not being a water boy, I got seasick. Just to inject a little humor. But then, as I was getting seasick, I learned to cut hair, knowing what little I had experience of watching my in-laws. They were beauticians and barbers. I cut hair for nothing. But because of the donations, I made $8 at the bottom of the ship. Eventually, the captain of the Marines says, "Are you a barber?" "No, sir." "What is your number?" 415. That's snare drummer. He says, "Well, that's not your occupation." "No, sir, but the boys can't get their hair cut aboard ship because the Navy barbers don't have time for us. Therefore, we've been on this ship going on 39 days, and the hair was growing too much. So I used to cut the hair the best I could, and I did a pretty good job. And being Marines, we don't like to have crew cuts. We like to have civilian cuts, you know." He says, "Okay, carry on." But then as I cut one guy with an Iroquois Indian haircut. Another one I cut with a baldy sour. In other words, clean cut. Came back, he says, "I'm going to court-martial you." And I said, "Sorry, I'm sorry. I didn't know what the rules were." He says, "Okay, you're forgiven." From that time on, I was cutting his hair.
Oh.
Now, did he give you good tips?
I made PFC overseas on Guam when we landed. I'm sorry, before that we landed on Perry Island, before going to Guam, and they let us off the ship, and we had a little beer party. And there we rendezvoused with 2 more ships. I stayed on the same ship I was shipped out of San Diego. The rest of the 44th replacement draft went on to the other ships to Australia. Eventually they hit Okinawa, but I went on to Guam. And from Guam we waded ashore on to Agana village. And then we went up into the hills where we bivouacked, and we made friends with the Guamanians, who were Catholic people, and they're very religious. And that's another story.
Now, I know that you had mentioned earlier, besides the bandsman, that you had some experience with choir.
Yes, I sang in a choir as a youth, but I was not really eligible. I had to be a senior to join the senior choir. I was a tenor and I had quite a voice. Being Italian, I guess, makes a difference, I don't know. But I loved to sing, and I used to be able to sing high notes. But I sang in a choir, and from that experience that I had then, when I was overseas, perhaps I'm a little ahead of my story there, but from Guam, we ended up moving to Saipan, and they transferred me from the 3rd Marine Division to the 2nd Marine Division. From Saipan, then the bomb dropped in Nagasaki, and from there we got aboard ship and went to Nagasaki. In Nagasaki is where the band was billeted in a Christian girls' school, and I sang in a Protestant choir. And what happened is Father Ahorn from Long Beach, California, caught me. He says, "Why are you singing in a Protestant choir?" I love to sing, and I said, "It doesn't make any difference to me because I'm singing the praises of God." I said, "That's the way it is." He said, "Well, we'd like to have a Catholic choir for a Christmas Mass. Would you join?" "I sure would," I says, "Father." I knew the Mass, the Kyrie, so forth, the proper of the Mass. And we started to have rehearsals. And as we had rehearsals, nobody knew what was going on, how to work, how to coordinate the tenors and the basses and so forth, okay? We had one fellow play the piano, but nobody directing him. So being a musician, and music is very dear to my heart, I said, "Father, I'm taking a leave of absence." "Where are you going?" I says, "I can't stand this." I said, "There's nobody here to give direction. You don't know anything about the Mass?" "You do, Father, but the people don't. They don't know how to sing. They don't know how to coordinate and phrase the music." He says, "Anybody here know how to direct a choir?" Nobody knew. He asked me. I says, "Well, I used to have my own dance band in high school." And he says, "You think you could handle it?" "Yes, Father, under one condition." "What is that?" "I'm only a PFC, and we have sergeants, we have lieutenants and captains in here singing." And I says, "If they're going to take any direction, you got to take it from the PFC, and I won't take anything, any huff or puff. It's my direction, my choir, and you will do as I say. There's no authority here as far as rank." He says, "You got it." We put the Mass on, and we sang it at the Nagasaki Theater. We recorded parts of it, and one exciting thing during the Mass was as we were singing on the altar along the priest with the high Mass, 3 priests, somebody dropped a steel helmet on a concrete deck, and you could hear it in the transcript or the recording, which was very, very bad because the generators were going on. But from that point on, I wrote a few ballads. One was a big orchestration, that we played for a fireman's ball in Amsterdam when I came back. I still had the manuscript.
Now, did you see any major combat with your duty with the Marines?
I am glad to say I did not. I am probably the luckiest guy in the Marines. However, I had one incident where I thought I might have had an occasion to kill a first lieutenant. The occasion arose when I was doing guard duty at an air base on Guam. And he was the first lieutenant and officer of the day. And I was stationed at a post. And as he crept along the jungle, back of the palm trees, I saw something coming. So I ducked behind a palm tree. And I had my rifle focused on him because I was one shot short of being an expert with a rifle, M1. I pointed at him, and as he approached me, I went to his rear and went side by side until I got in front of him, presented the arms, which is a manner of saluting him, and he immediately grasped my rifle, asked me the various questions about the orders of the day and how many rounds of ammunition. Well, I lied. I said I didn't have any. In reality, I did, but I had taken them out. And after he got through, he gave me the rifle and he said, "Carry on. Begging your pardon, sir." "What is it?" I says, "May I say something out of the ordinary?" "Go ahead." "You've got a lot of guts." He said, "What do you mean?" I have 2 children at home. I had this pointer right at your heart. I could have killed you because you came out like a bold piece of timber out of the field there, and I thought you were a Jap because there were 2 Japs, 2 officers that got killed that same night trying to the Japs were infiltrating into the commissary for food through their caves that they were embedded in.
Now,
He laughed and he left.
Now, what was it like with any of the people that you came across, the Guamese, the Japanese?
The Guamanians were very religious. We had them enjoy our picnics with us. In our band on Guam, which was the 3rd Marine Band, we had 3 sections of bands, battalion bands. 3 bands equal the division band. And we invited them all over in the tents. We made ice cream, we had Coca-Cola, no beer, and we had hot dogs and things like that. They were very, very nice people. They were escorted by the military police and the priests at church. Nobody touched anybody. Okay?
Now, what was the feeling with Japanese people? Were they very resentful?
When I arrived in Nagasaki, I may be an extrovert, I don't know. Maybe I try to be nice, I don't know. But I always try to treat everybody as a human being. My opinion of the Japanese people, per se, they were wonderful, very kind, very courteous. I had made friends with them. One in particular, as you note my record here, was Professor Matsuno. He was a professor of economics in a college in Nagasaki. He and I became very friends because he noticed I had a Parker pen, which had gold tip. And he kept looking at it, and well, it ended up that I gave it to him. I enjoyed persimmon and tea with his wife and 2 lovely little daughters at her home, as is customary in Japan. The other friend I had was a minister's son, Presbyterian minister's son. We went to movies together, and he would explain some of the movies that took place as Japanese. But then, how I met Professor Matsuno was at the time I was looking for stamps. In Japanese, the word is kite. And I went to a department store. I wanted to buy stamps for my very good friend in Amsterdam, Mr. Latisse. He was a stamp collector. And I was able to buy some stamps, and through him, I negotiated the word stamp through the clerk, and that's how I got to know him. I finally got stamps and bought albums of them, and I brought them back home and gave it to him. Some of the stamps were very valuable, but I was not afraid to.
I noticed when we were looking through your den, you have a nice stamp collection there. I imagine you have exhibited this at various functions.
The World War II stamps that I have framed, I won't say what it cost me, it's not important. But the important thing is it's history. It reflects the various campaigns of the World War II, and each stamp depicts a pictorial view of it. And it has the 5 emblems or discs of the various services. Then the American flag. And on the bottom is my name, and then the person that made the frame for me, which I purchased and had it done. It's a very beautiful thing, and it was displayed at the Vietnam Memorial down in Albany by the Capitol building. That was there for 3 weeks.
Now
Three months, excuse me.
Now going back into your service experiences, did you ever have any injuries or illnesses while in the service?
The only injury I ever had was pains in my chest, which never got documented while I was overseas, and they cured me with belladonna drops in water to kill the pain. I think in reality that was the reason why eventually I got my heart attack, and I had an operation 5 years ago.
Now, how do you assess the men and officers you served with? I imagine you had some that were rotten and you had others that were almost saints.
Of all the people I've been associated that had any kind of official responsibility, the one I detested most of all was a PFC drill instructor. He picked on me religiously, being the only Italian boy, the only oldest boy, and the shortest boy. And when my wife sent me my food, like pepperoni, he took it away from me, and I never forgave him for that. And the reason was, I worked for GE, and he knew it, and he worked for Westinghouse, which is a competitor. Just a little humor.
Yeah.
But ending up, I became the number 2 rifleman, and as a day of graduation from boot camp, I was pressing my jeans, or blue, not grays rather, or the greens. I didn't have a set of blues. I couldn't afford them. He came up and he congratulated me. I says, "Thank you very much." He says, "That was nice shooting." I said, "Yeah, I made it my business." He says, "What do you mean?" I says, "Carl," that's K-A-R-L-E. I just wanted to remind you, don't ever get into my sights overseas, because I'll never forget you, what you did to me and how you degraded me. And that was the only one you picked on. Maybe that was part of the training, but you made a hell of a man out of me. Mm-hmm. Okay?
Now, where were you, and can you remember what the feeling was like among the troops and the people when the war was officially over?
Well, when the war was over, we were on Saipan, and we were told to board ship and head for parts unknown, but it was Nagasaki. And to get to Nagasaki, you had to go through between the islands and the hills with torpedoes going this way at you. And it was recorded at the time, as we were on ship, expect 70% casualties. Well, needless to say, jubilation was part of the day. Let's get back to the choir. As a result of the Christmas choir, Father Ahern gave me a bottle of Shelleys. Of course, CFCs don't get liquor. Officers do. That bottle of Shelly, it could have been sold for hundreds of dollars. You know where it went? Everybody had a little swig at New Year's Eve. Not me. I didn't drink.
That's interesting.
The general feeling when, now can you remember where you were and what it was like when you got the word that the war was officially over? What was the general feeling of the troops and the people?
Well, the troops were very joyful. As far as people were concerned, we never saw a native. I don't know why, but maybe it's because of the cliffs that thousands of the Saipan people dove off of the cliffs, as you recall history tells you. But my joy at the time after that was to be able to go to the edge of the cliff and watch the waves and the little pools of water and the various assortment of color tropical fish in the little inlets. It was beautiful.
Now in Japan, you said you got to Nagasaki. That was one of the two targets of the atomic bomb. Did you get to see the destruction that was in that area?
Very much so. It was devastating. People were burned. Houses were torn apart. I can't imagine how we would feel today. It was terrible. It was terrible. The destruction on there could last for years and years. I remember playing ball where the bomb dropped and the building adjacent to it had girders that were twisted from the bomb. The heat of the bomb twisted the girders. And that's where I was exposed to radiation, and it's so documented today.
And did you experience any effects from that radiation?
Thank God I have had no experience from that whatsoever other than cancer in my feet, which I don't believe is attributed to it. It might, but that is always under surveillance. And I've been treated for radiation on that basis.
Now, while you were in the service, did you receive any kind of decorations, medals, or commendations for your service?
I received nothing more than the ordinary ribbons of being overseas. Other than that, I had no reason to accept or to receive any medals of honor other than the fact that I did my job.
Now, when did you leave Japan for home? I assume, did you come directly home, or?
When I left Japan, we left from Sasabo, because from Nagasaki we were shipped over to Sasabo, a naval base. And from Sasabo we boarded a ship and we came back. Needless to say, I got sick again, seasick. Must have been the Navy gave us fried fish. I guess all the sailors and the Marines had their heads over the railings.
And so how long was the trip to come home?
I don't remember exactly, but it must have been a good week or so. But from there we went to Camp Pendleton. And we had liberty 48 hours. We didn't have dress shoes. We took off and hitchhiked to Hollywood, went to the Palladium,
And
you know, that's just about it. We saw the Palladium and saw the dance band. I forget what the number the trumpeter plays, but I brought back some jewelry from Japan, some different trinkets and things for friends, tortoiseshell ware, rings, rubies.
And then how long were you stationed there before you...
Stationed at Camp Pendleton, didn't take about a few more days, and then board ship. Went all the way back. I wanted to not go on board ship. I wanted to get discharged at Camp Pendleton. I wanted to travel into Mexico by myself and then go up through the northern part of the states, over across the Dakotas, back home, because I didn't think I'd ever go that way again in my life. But needless to say again, the orders came out aboard ship. Well, aboard ship, I was the king. I was stationed in the middle of the cars, and I said direct traffic when it came to chow time. This group went to first, and then this group. And we ended up in St. Louis, where we got eggs and bacon, and we had breakfast there. And then from there, we came back to Breckenridge Naval Base, where they discharged us. From there, I met my wife in New York, spent a few days there, and came back home.
Now,
Started life all over again.
Now, when you got home, I imagine your children had grown quite a bit and changed. And
Yeah, Helena, I forget now. You know, that was 1946. She was 6 years old then. And Christine, when Christine was born, I thought she'd be a boy. But what we were going to name her at the time is a funny thing. If it was a boy, it was going to be Christopher Jr. If it was a girl, it was going to be Christine. Well, it was a girl. She was supposed to be the boy. But I have two wonderful daughters. One is going to be 63 in December, the other 51 or 59.
and now how many years have you and your wife been married?
We've been married too long, but the years are 64.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to celebrate that at the Immaculate Conception with the bishop saying Mass in October here.
Now, looking back on your service, was there any unusual, funny, or inspiring thing that you experienced? I thought you had mentioned something about Red Cross workers, people who stood out.
When I was on Guam, let's say this, on my way down to Paris Island in Baltimore, the Salvation Army met us at the station as we stopped and gave us coffee and donuts. As far as the Red Cross was concerned, many people dislike them. I love them. I think they do wonders. I think they're deserving of all the contribution anybody can give them, as much as they can. But overseas, I needed a piece of paper or pencil, Red Cross again. I wanted a chest set to pass my time, they were there. I wanted soap to wash my face and hands, they were there. Nobody else was there to give it to us.
Now, when you got back, what was the discharge procedure like? Were they doing it individually or big groups at a time?
Individually, but quick and fast.
Now, did you have to pay your own way back home, or did they furnish you with transportation?
I don't recall that for sure, but I don't really recall. I can't say yes or no. But regardless of that, home sweet home.
So then when you got home, what did you do after you arrived home? What kind of work? Or
The first thing I had to do was to start providing income, because there wasn't any. The allotment weren't much to sustain the family. I lived with my in-laws, and that was nice. It was a big help. But I went back to General Electric to try to get a job back, which they had to hire me. I couldn't get in because there was a strike in 1946. So I had to go on the 5220 club. I got 2 checks and that was it. And I got back into General Electric. I got back in the same job. From there I progressed up into supervision and inventory control and government termination of contracts.
Now, for those that are not familiar with the term 5220, correct me if I'm wrong, they receive $20 a week for a maximum of 52 weeks?
That is correct.
$20 at that time, I would assume, did not buy much.
Didn't buy much, but it sustained you. You had to be frugal about it. You had to count your pennies.
Now, did you get back into your music again? When did you get into that?
I started to play dance music on the side over the weekends, like country music and things like that, hillbilly stuff. But then I said to myself, this is not my life. I got 2 kids at home, playing the violin in front of a group of people, and have the girls try to smother you, so to speak. It's not my life. So I gave it up. I went back home, and I never played again. My violin rests on a couch here now, and I'm going to sell it. I haven't played it in 10 years.
Now, how did the military influence your life? You were anxious to go in and...
Well, military life gave me a different perspective of life as to how you react towards everybody else. You had to learn to live with a person. You had to learn to love and forgive. If you can't do that, if you haven't got love in your heart when you look in the mirror, you can't give it to anybody else. I hope those are words that people will take seriously.
Did you keep up any correspondence, travel to convention meetings with, and are you involved with any kind of organization of ex-military people?
It's funny you ask that question because I got 2 involved. First of all, I had friends, and I had quite an association with, I still have, with one Marine in Housatonic, Massachusetts. He was like a brother to me. He was younger, and I acted like a big brother to him. The second phase of your question was?
Any involvement, did you join any kind of organizations?
Since I've been out of the service, I joined the Marine Corps League. I went up through the chairs. I finally became commandant of the Marine Corps League in Albany, Captain William Dale O'Brien. I was commander 3 times for 3 terms of the VFW in Guilderland Center of the VFW. I was commander 3 times of the Italian American War Veterans. I currently belong to the Zaloga American Legion program or organization. I did belong to the American Musician Association of the Bandsman of Marines, California, but since then I have dropped it because you can have yourself involved in too many things and the dues are pretty extensive. I am a pedigree devil dog of the Marine Corps League. I got that pedigree in Boston. In 1982, I was awarded a top recruit of the Marine Corps League of the country. I became 2nd in honors as a Marine of the Year in the United States in '82 at Dearborn, Michigan. Also, I was the Marine of the Year in the state of New York, nominated. I currently do a lot of writing for our past National Commandant and for many organizations that have newsletters. I sort of take their words and I correct them and I phrase them, as best I can for the limited amount of knowledge I have. But as far as I'm concerned, my greatest accomplishment are 2. One, I established a Marine Scholarship Bandsman Award in Albany County through the Marine Corps League, which eventually, I understand, is going to be in my memory. There was another.
I know you...
The other one is the monument, when I was commander of the VFW in Gilliland. I, along with my veterans of foreign war members, went out and solicited, whereas we garnered as much as $9,000 to $10,000, and we put up the monument in front of Gilliland Town Hall, which honored all veterans of all wars, and no specific person or individual political person was ever mentioned in their sets. That is perpetual.
Now, as a Marine, have you gone to Washington, D.C., the capital, to see the Marine Monument there?
I never got to see the Capitol, but I did get to see the Iwo Jima Monument. I did go to the cemetery.
Arlington.
Arlington Cemetery.
Right. Yeah, we went on a bus tour several days. It was beautiful, but it was awful hot, and I just was not the right guy. I didn't feel good.
Now, when you came back here, I would assume that you haven't had no problem getting medical treatment at the VA Center.
As far as I am concerned, the VA Medical Center in Albany is one of the finest institutions that I can say around, judging from what I hear. I had heart surgery, I've had pneumonia, I had gout, I've been having cancer treatment in 4 different spots in my legs, which the Mediterranean area people from that area are prone to. The service I get down there is tremendous. My medication is cheap. Over the counter, I can get some over the counter, it's even cheaper. But the attendance I get is worthy of consideration to go and get it. I advise everybody get a card, be registered with them. It may take a few days and months, but it's your fault for procrastinating.
Now,
Okay.
looking back on all your experiences, would you do it again if the situation was the same?
I definitely would. Once a Marine, always a Marine.
That's what I gather. Well, I think this is fine, and we thank you very much for doing this interview. And
we'll make sure that this is on its way to the Military Museum up in Saratoga. And it's going to be in their record area. And the museum is located on Lake Avenue in the old armory, just up the street from the Saratoga newspaper. And it's worthwhile for anybody to go up there and see
I gotta
it.
get up there and see it. Francis,